Nicolas Maduro has won re-election to a third term in office. Maduro celebrated his victory by claiming foreign terrorists had tried to hack Venezuela's election system. He did not provide evidence. Venezuela's opposition says it's Maduro and his supporters who have stolen the election. Maria Corina Machado is the leader of Venezuela's opposition.
What has happened in our country is a huge social movement that they will not stop. We are a civic, peaceful movement, and that's how we will keep working until we make the truth prevail.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. has serious concerns about the Venezuelan election results and whether they reflect the will of the people. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear was in Georgia yesterday campaigning for likely Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris. Beshear has been mentioned as a possible running mate on the Democratic ticket. From member station WABE, Rahul Bali reports he visited a heavily Republican county near Atlanta.
Beshear implored supporters who came to this rally in Forsyth County to do more to get out the vote.
Every vote in every county matters. There aren't red counties and blue counties. They're just counties with hard-working families that are going to be open to hear you talk to them.
After the event, Beshear was asked whether he was being vetted by the Harris campaign.
What I can say is it's an honor to be considered. And no matter what happens, I'll be working every day between now and Election Day to elect Kamala Harris.
Other names mentioned by attendees as a possible running mate for Harris included North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. For NPR News, I'm Rahul Bali in Cumming, Georgia.
An Iowa law banning abortion as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy has now taken effect this morning. Anti-abortion rights advocates are celebrating, saying it will reduce abortions in Iowa. But Iowa Public Radio's Natalie Krebs reports abortion rights activists are expanding other clinics in nearby states.
The law bans abortion when cardiac activity is detected, which is before many people know they're pregnant. It has exceptions for rape, incest, life-threatening conditions, and fetal abnormalities that are fatal. Sarah Traxler is the chief medical officer of Planned Parenthood North Central States. She says Planned Parenthood is expanding abortion care in neighboring Nebraska and Minnesota clinics in anticipation of seeing more Iowa patients.
We expanded our capacity at health centers in Mankato and Minneapolis, as well as in Omaha, where we are tripling our patient capacity by increasing our exam rooms from 4 to 16.
In the 2 years since the Supreme Court ended the constitutional right to an abortion, around half of states have banned or restricted the procedure. For NPR News, I'm Natalie Krebs in Des Moines.
You're listening to NPR.
On WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Michelle Coram. Federal investigators will be on the lookout again for foreign interference during this year's elections. Steve Newborn reports that Senator Rick Scott says it's only gotten worse since Russia tried to influence the 2016 presidential election.
During an appearance with veterans in Tampa last week, Scott pressed the Biden administration to do more to stop foreign governments from interfering with U.S. elections.
Iran's doing it, China's doing it, Russia's doing it. They're paying for unrest in our country. Americans need to wake up, right? We have enemies. It's disgusting, and we've got to understand this is going to go on as long as we don't call these countries out.
Earlier this year, lawmakers warned of a growing threat of foreign interference in the 2024 election and questioned whether federal agencies and tech companies are prepared to respond. I am Steve Newborn in Tampa.
Here in Jacksonville, drivers can expect a state repaving project to start Friday on University Boulevard from San Jose to I-95. The $9 million project includes resurfacing the road as well as new curb and gutters, sidewalks, signs, and signals. The project also includes median modifications to reduce crashes at high-conflict areas, including the elimination of the left turn movement from Chester Avenue to westbound University. It's 80 degrees in Jacksonville now. Small chance of thunderstorms mainly after 2 today. Mostly sunny near 91 degrees.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Amazon Business, committed to being a digital purchasing solution for businesses so that growing the business is the main focus and not admin and paperwork. Learn about smart business buying at amazonbusiness.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, when homeowners in an intercoastal West neighborhood began receiving tax assessments of several $1,000s, some say they were blindsided. We explore how a special taxing district was created without their knowledge and what they want the city to do now. Later in the program, one of the most threatened marine species in the world was found in local waterways. We talked to the scientist who discovered the rare sawfish and why it gives him hope for the fish's recovery. But first, homeowners living along Hogpen Creek got a $4,500 property tax hike this year that they say came out of left field. To discuss it, we are joined by former Jacksonville City Council member Robin Lum. Good morning, Robin.
Good morning.
And Kazmira Harrison, reporter for Jacksonville Today. Good morning, Kaz.
Good morning.
So, Kazmira, you spent time with a number of residents out in the Hogpen Creek area. This is basically east of San Pablo, north of Beach Boulevard,
Yes.
and along the intercoastal. How did these people first learn about the new taxing district?
Well, they first learned about the actual district with a letter in the mail that said, "Hey, your taxes are going up. You got an assessment for $2,500." It was like prorated for half a year at the beginning because they were late. The district was late getting the tax bill in
Gotcha. And this was supposed to be basically a $4,500 bill the
per
first
year.
year, or
Yeah,
per year, and it could go up to as much as 7,500.
7,500.
Okay.
7,500.
And this goes on for how long? How long are they going to be taxed?
Essentially, it's forever. I mean, because you have you're paying for the first dredge, but then there's maintenance included. So however, long it takes to maintain the creek and keep the silt out, but it's an ongoing problem. So essentially, you're going to be paying for maintenance dredging for
Why is this assessment? I mean, I
foreseeable
think we can
future.
all understand the shock and sort of dismay of getting a big tax bill in the mail, but why is this a particular concern for some of the homeowners in that neighborhood?
N- Not everybody has the same amount of money. Not everybody has the same amount of land. Some people have moved into that area in the 1980s, bought their house really inexpensively. They're older residents who are on fixed incomes, and they were not expecting to get something like this.
And there is a little bit of a divide because part of that neighborhood is very new, very wealthy. There's kind of a gated community component where the homes are much more valuable.
Yes. And part of the dredging project will essentially increase home values. And that's what the district seems to be hyper focused on, is that the home values will increase if you can bring a like 30-foot boat down Hogpen Creek.
Sure, that makes sense. So, Robin Lum, how is it that residents would not be notified of something like this?
This is how city council operates. Unless it's a zoning issue, the only obligation the city council has when they're passing an ordinance is to advertise it in a newspaper of public record, which in this case the city almost always uses the Financial News and Daily Record, and uh, then to post it on the website. I think they post it in a couple of places. One is on the city council's website, and there's another place they post it on the city's website. So unless you get up in the morning and the first thing you do is you go to the Financial News and Daily Record and read the legal notices, you do not realize that there's legislation like this pending in front of city council. And city council has no obligation to send out notices.
It seems extraordinary that someone could just establish a taxing district. Where does the impetus for creating this district even come from?
There's a state statute that allows the creation of what are called either independent or dependent special districts. A dependent special district is a district whose jurisdiction is wholly within the municipality or county that brought it into existence. So this is known as the Hogpen Dependent Special District, and it can be created by legislative fiat.
Where does the actual inspiration come from, though? Who created it?
Well, it was Rory Diamond's legislation. He introduced it. He was out of the country at the time doing military training.
He's a city council member. He represents that
Yeah,
district?
he represents City Council District 13, which is almost exclusively the beaches, but it also crosses the Intercoastal Waterway and takes in portions of the area west of the Intercoastal, in and around where the Hog Pen District was created. Now, if I can explain to the listeners, this all began as what is known as a petition under the Neighborhood Assessment Program of the city of Jacksonville. So the city of Jacksonville has a program that allows a group of property owners to petition the city to impose a special assessment for specific infrastructure improvements, things like that. So this is a program that's been around for a number of years. So this all began as a petition drive under the Neighborhood Assessment Program. And that petition itself actually was titled as a preliminary petition, and it uses the word preliminary study and preliminary petition about 7 or 8 times in the text of the petition itself. But for some reason, the petition process was abandoned. According to Tricia Bowles, who is the attorney for the city council who was responsible for this legislation, she told me that, we no longer use the neighborhood assessment program for dredging projects. So that's when the petition process was abandoned and they introduced the legislation.
And to be clear, the neighborhoods, the one that is run by the city's neighborhood department, that district that could have been created, does that require notification? Does that require a petition? In order to be approved by the city, if that initial petition.
Yeah,
process.
if you're operating under the neighborhood assessment program, if you're trying to get specialized improvements that the property owners agree to, I think it's like a 2/3 threshold, then that is a petition process. So everybody, of course, is notified by virtue of this petition having been circulated and signed and presented to city council. But as soon as they decided to abandon the petition process, they immediately went to the state statute, which allows them to create a district like this by legislative fiat. And that's what happened. And nobody knew that this had changed. So you have a lot of property owners assuming that everything that had gone before with this petition was simply preliminary.
So we should say we did reach out to City Council member Rory Diamond. We emailed, we called. We have not heard back. Kazmira, it doesn't sound like he's been responsive to resident requests either.
To my knowledge, everyone I've spoke to, including the district meeting recently and the board members, nobody has heard from him.
And he's back in the country, as far as we know.
As far as I know.
Okay. We are talking about the creation of a special taxing district on the Intercoastal West neighborhood, Holiday Hills generally. Is that what it's called? Holiday Harbor?
Holiday Harbor.
Sorry, Holiday Harbor.
Well, there are several neighborhoods. One is called Seven Pines Island. The other is Holiday Harbor. And then there's Ketch Cove.
Okay. All of those affected. If you want to weigh in on this issue, we invite your calls or comments. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can call us on air at 904-549-2937. We have a call from Jean in Beauclair. Good morning, Jean. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. How does this situation with Hog Pen Creek compare or contrast to the property homeowners on the beach in Duval County and St. Johns County who benefit, and I know it's federal, but who benefit from dredging projects? How come Hog Pen Creek gets taxed and the people on the beach don't?
And you're thinking of what kind of dredging project at the beach?
The beach renourishment, the sand replenishment.
I gotcha. Okay, good question. So those people are having, their property replenished by beach renourishment, but that is not something that they're paying for directly.
That's primarily, that's an expenditure by the federal government, primarily, I guess, to maintain tourism and to maintain a beachfront that could be used by tourists.
So we also have a question from John on Facebook. He says, what role, if any, are water management districts playing in any special taxing districts that have a dredging impact throughout the state?
I've done a number of public records requests. I've done public records requests all over. And contacted the St. Johns River Water Management District. They claim to have no authority over this. The two regulatory entities that do have authority over dredging projects like this would be the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. At this point, I don't know if the FDEP is involved. I do know that the Board of Supervisors of the Hog Pen Dependent Special District submitted an application, a dredging application, to the Army Corps of Engineers about 2 months ago, and that's about a 6-7 month process.
But those agencies would just be from an environmental regulatory standpoint, not anybody that would interfere with this taxing district or have any say.
No, all they would do is say yay or nay on the dredge. And my understanding is the Army Corps of Engineers almost always rubber stamps these things.
So, Kazmira, there are people, we should say, plenty of people that do support this for reasons that you mentioned, including home values, because these are homes that are on an intercoastal property. And if people can't take boats to dock at those docks, certainly that is a diminishment of their value.
Well, certainly they can take boats. They have boats out there, but because of the dredging, they need to go out at low tide. They would need it to be dredged deeper.
At low tide, they can't get
But
out
they
at low
can
tide.
go out at high tide.
Okay, that's
The
interesting.
goal is to dredge to 5 feet at mean low water, meaning mean low tide.
5 to 7. I think.
And they're talking about possibly dredging it a bit deeper to Seven Pines Island. There's also another element to this whole story, if I can introduce it at this time.
For sure.
So I see this as two component parts. One has to do with how the Hog Pen Dependent District came into existence, and the other one has to do with the cause of the silt and sediment entering Hog Pen Creek. So Hog Pen Creek is unique because the city of Jacksonville's Sandalwood Canal, which runs for 4 miles from I-295 all the way to Hog Pen Creek, drains approximately 11 square miles of land area between Atlantic and Beach Boulevard.
So this is a canal that runs from west to east and empties into Hog Pen?
Yeah, it is an open canal. At some points, it's like 30 feet wide. I've gone and surveyed it at various points where you can observe from bridges, and you have to take a look at this thing. It is a substantial piece of infrastructure in the city's stormwater management system. And even in a half-inch rainfall, it could account for millions of gallons of surface water runoff entering into Sandalwood Canal and finding its way into Hog Pen Creek. And if you look at Hog Pen Creek, if you look at the hydrographic surveys, you realize that the sediment and silt is piling up in the area closest to San Pablo Road, which is the area farthest from the Intercoastal Waterway. And the areas closest to the Intercoastal Waterway actually have the deepest channels. During mean low water near Seven Pines Island, it's 5 to 7 feet deep. If you go down to San Pablo Road, it's only a half foot at mean low water.
So the further west you go, the origin of the canal, it's much shallower, and then it gets much deeper as it reaches the creek.
And you can see, we have photographs. You can see piles of sand. We've got a photograph of one of the people that was interviewed by Kazmira, Moulton Smith. He's standing in the middle of Hog Pen Creek at low tide, and he's standing on sand. He's not
You could
standing
walk
on.
across the creek. When I went out and interviewed him at low tide, you could walk right across.
And so what's the significance of the canal getting deeper as it goes towards the creek?
Well, it's the canal is the canal, so the canal empties into the creek. But if you look at the accumulation of silt and sand, it's closest to San Pablo Road, which is where Sandalwood Canal is basically emptying into Hog Pen Creek. There's very little evidence that the silt and sand is coming from the Intercoastal Waterway. There's two reasons for that. One is that there's virtually no dredging activity taking place in the Intercoastal Waterway. So there's no indication that there's silt and sand accumulating in the waterway. When I say virtually no dredging activity, the only thing that's happened in the past 25 or 30 years are a couple of small dredges in and around the marina at Atlantic Boulevard, where Atlantic Boulevard crosses the Intercoastal Waterway.
What about the dredging of the main stem of the St. Johns River?
That's a dredging project in the St. Johns River. There's no indication that any silt or sand escaped and went down the Intercoastal Waterway. There's another factor here too. Hog Pen Creek joins the Intercoastal Waterway at a right angle. So even if you have an incoming tide, current of the incoming tide is around 2 miles an hour, currents don't make right-hand turns.
I guess your contention is that the silt is originating in the city's canal, the canal the city is supposed to maintain, and that's where the silt is coming from.
The city is charging, and these, by the way, there's a total of 111 affected property owners. The city has in setting up this this dependent special district, the city is requiring property owners to fix a problem the city created. This problem was created by the city of Jacksonville.
I mean, what should be happening to the silt in that canal if it was being handled properly, in your view?
Years ago, the city of Jacksonville actually paid for a dredge. I think it was completed in 2008. There was supposed to be a split between the city and the property owners, but for reasons that are somewhat convoluted, the city wound up paying for the whole thing.
Where did they dredge?
They dredged Hogpen Creek.
Okay.
This was in 2008. I believe it's the city's responsibility to undertake the cost of the dredge because the city benefits in several ways. Through this dredging project. First of all, they're able to maintain Hogpen Creek as continue to receive stormwater from the Sandalwood Canal, and they're able to, and this is their way of avoiding a $4 to $5 million cost. But the city is shrugging its shoulders and saying, "Well, we don't think we're responsible." Well, that's absurd. I mean, you build this canal for the purpose of transporting millions of gallons of sediment-laden water, and it winds up in Hogpen Creek. And for the city to say they're not responsible, that lacks credibility.
We're talking about a $4,500 annual bill that was delivered to homeowners in the Hogpen Creek area. You can join our conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We have a call from Javon. Javon, go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning. And it sounds like the former councilman just answered the question that I had, that the cause of the buildup is from the runoff from the Sandalwood Creek, not from residents just wanting to have deeper access to the intercoastal or, the consequence of living on the intercoastal. What recourse do those living in this Hogpen area have in terms of getting this tax called back or reduced in some way, at least to maybe meet the city on the middle, or to maybe distribute the cost more fairly? Everybody is benefiting from not having flooding in their community, but it seems like the burden of this cost is at the very least being borne unfairly.
That's right. So this board that was appointed in the creation of this district is 7 members, all of them appointed by the council at this point, and no vote for a couple of years in terms of replacing those members, is my understanding.
There have been a total of 9 supervisors. So right now it's a 7-member board. There were a couple of resignations. One of the problems I have with the way the Board of Supervisors operates is it's when they had a vacancy, they didn't put out a notice to all the property owners saying, "By the way, we've got a vacancy. Who wants to apply?" You read the minutes, and somebody, one of the board members said, "Hey, I'll ask around Seven Pines Island to see who wants to serve." There's also never been, by the way, every vote the board's ever taken has been unanimous. But to answer the caller's questions, what we're asking for right now is one of two things: either for City Council to issue a cease and desist order to the Board of Supervisors of the district, telling them to stop all operations until a study can be conducted, documenting the cause of the silt and sediment entering Hogpen Creek, which is basically trying to calculate the impact of that Sandalwood Canal is having on Hogpen Creek, or to dissolve the board, which can be done under state law, and for them to start over again.
And is that something that you, working with the residents, you're pushing council to do?
We're taking this in stages. Right now, of the 111 property owners, we've got, I think, 41 on record opposing the dredging assessment or the dredge or the way in which this district came into existence. It appears, however, that this is probably headed to court. One of the property owners has hired Jack Webb, who's a former city council president, to represent them. And it looks like, unless we can get some movement from city council on this, it looks like this is probably going to be headed to court.
Kasmira, I want to just go back to that petition drive because even though they abandoned the petition that would have been required under the city's version of a special assessment district, it did come up as proof or evidence of community buy-in when this was being heard by city council itself. So tell us about how that petition was used and whether there's concerns about whether that was appropriate.
So that's that's kind of the questions that I have about that. So when the finance committee heard it, there was one council member who asked a question about the petition because they had all those petition signatures, and the attorney Trisha Bowles said that these are the people in support of it. They had like what 60? They were supposed to have 67% for the city program. They had like 70%.
And so the city council member was basically saying, does the community support this?
Right. And she said yes, because she used those positions. And so he was satiated by that answer, and it passed unanimously. My biggest question about all of this could happen everywhere, anywhere. How do you fix that? How do you make more checks and balances?
You reached out to the Deegan administration, to the mayor's office for
Mhm.
some comment for your reporting. What did they tell you?
They gave me the answer from the public works director was that the city will not be paying for any dredging of the creek.
Okay. And as you said, Robin, you believe that the city previously did in 2008 pay for that very dredging.
Yeah, we know that they did.
Mhm.
Originally, it was supposed to be a split cost, but like I said, because of certain circumstances, the city wound up paying for the entire cost of the dredge.
So it, I'm going to give you a moment if you want to just turn off your phone. I see it's ringing a little bit on it. That's all right. So Kaz, what next steps is the legal avenue, the litigation that Robin Lum was referencing? Is that the next step for these residents?
That's certainly the next step for these residents. Yeah, it doesn't seem like the city is going to be responsive to right at this moment. Um, Perhaps a city councilman could introduce legislation. Perhaps Rory Diamond could, but nobody knows because nobody's talked to him.
The intention is to. I've been working on this now for several months. I probably have about 120 hours in on this. By the way, I'm doing this as a volunteer, unpaid.
Yeah.
And the plan is to write a report summarizing these facts
Mhm.
and make sure that the city council has that, because right now there are very few members on city council who even know about this.
Why are you drawn to this? Why are you volunteering your time and taking on this issue?
A good friend of mine, Helen Chestnut, lives on Ketch Cove Drive, and she called me last September in tears because she'd gotten this bill in the mail and she had no idea how she was going to be able to pay it. She didn't even know what it was for. She had no understanding of what was going on. So I agreed to help, and then I began meeting with some of her neighbors, groups of about 10 or 12 people, and then began doing a lot of research. And we wound up doing a mail survey to all 111 property owners with a questionnaire. And so between that and our own petition, like I said, we've identified about 42 people that are now opposed to the dredge, including 14 who had signed the petition initially.
That preliminary petition.
Right.
And I think what is so surprising to people about this and about this story is that this district came into existence essentially without these residents knowing about it. So if it can happen, as you say, if people don't wake up and look at the Daily Record legal notices, they may not be aware of something like this. It would basically be the prerogative of a city council member to create this district. Is that the way that it gets before city
Yeah,
council?
if there was a special need. So supposedly under state law, these districts are supposed to be created for the purpose of taxing um, persons who are going to benefit directly from a project like the dredge. And by the way, these assessments are per lot assessments; they're not ad valorem. So the person with the $1.5 million, $1.8 million house in Seven Pines Island is going to be paying the same amount of money as somebody whose house may only be worth $600,000 or $700,000. because it's a per lot assessment.
And Kaz, you were talking to, as you said, there's some older residents there who are on fixed incomes who bought their homes for much, much less money when they first moved in. They're going to be paying this assessment if they remain, but you've also talked to people who have concerns about trying to sell their home.
Yeah, I got contacted after my story ran by one of the residents' sons, and they were trying to sell their house, and now they're reaching hurdles because people look at that tax assessment that's coming down the pike, and they're like, "What? This is a liability."
Because this is it's estimated to be about $40,000 per household during the life of this initial dredge.
Over the course of the time.
We've got an email from Tom. He says, this is a drainage issue. How Public Works dredged the creek due to Hodges Road construction silting. The dispute stems from Public Works' position that this was a one-time action, though there have been Kernan and San Pablo construction since. You familiar with that, Robin?
I'm not quite sure what the question is. This is definitely a function of how the city has decided to handle stormwater runoff in that area between Atlantic and Beach Boulevard, east of I-295, and that's what Sandalwood Canal. Sandalwood Canal is designed to transport millions of gallons of water into Hogpen Creek.
I think what I take from that is, he's saying this is because of Hodges Road construction. And I know that there have been complaints over years by, for instance, the river keeper, that there's not enough barriers put up during construction when there's a heavy rainfall, that there can be a lot of silt buildup.
That can be a part of the problem, but that's not the problem. There's a calculation that we did that looked at just Hodges and Kernan and the widening projects that took place there. And those roadways are designed to drain directly into Sandalwood Canal. And so if you have like a 1-inch rainfall in those areas, that could easily account for a 2.5 to 3 million gallons of runoff.
Email from John. He says, I just wanted to note St. Augustine Beach City Council is meeting to discuss an additional assessment in the property taxes for the stormwater drainage that they improved. I mean, stormwater is an enormous cost for the city, and I guess some trickle down, obviously, for residents.
Yeah, when I was with the mayor's office, we spent a lot of time looking at the city's stormwater management because we were operating under a requirement for a nitrogen reduction entering the St. Johns River. And I became somewhat aware of, it's a massive infrastructure, but the city's entire plan for stormwater management is eventually to get the stormwater into the St. Johns River or one of its tributaries. That's where the stormwater goes. And in this particular case, Sandalwood Canal is transporting huge volumes of stormwater directly into Hogpen Creek. And the EPA lists sediment as the number one pollutant entering our streams, creeks, and waterways. That's at the top of the list.
It's certainly not going to get any better given the increased intensity of storms that we've seen. So we're seeing, heavier rainfalls, much more volume.
Oh, well, it's funny you should say that because I did some research. Jacksonville has an average of 16 rainfall events each year of 1 inch or more. That's an historic average that goes back a number of decades, very little variance between decades. That's a significant number of rainfall events. Now, that doesn't mean that the rainfall occurs, right in that one area and stays there. But, these storms will move through and you could have a half inch, 1 inch, inch and a half, and all that in a heavily urbanized area. Most of that runoff is going to wind up going into the city's stormwater management system. Some of it will evaporate. Some of it enters the superficial aquifer. Most of it, however, the largest percentage winds up going into the city's stormwater management system. And in this case, in this area, you're talking about Sandalwood Canal.
Kaz, just what are you hearing from residents now since your story published?
They're still worried. They want, they've been waiting patiently for somebody to help them do something.
Well, Robin Lum, Casimira Harrison, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
A face, it actually saws its prey in half. It's not the kind of thing most people would want to encounter. in the water, but this recent sawfish sighting is actually cause for celebration. So here to talk about it is Dr. Jim Galeslider, director of the University of North Florida's Shark Biology Program. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Also joined by UNF biology major Cassidy Terry. Hey, Cassidy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So let's start with what happened. This was just a couple of weeks ago, July 16th. The shark biology program was out on the St. Mary's River. What happened?
So, the shark biology program has been surveying shark populations on the First Coast for about 16 years. We regularly fish in the St. Mary's River. This was the end of the fishing day. A storm was actually coming in, so we were pulling our final line. And it was pretty clear that there was a large animal on it. I actually thought it was a large ray, and in fact, it was a large ray. A sawfish is a ray, but it was just about a 10-foot sawfish. It was actually an immature male sawfish, and the first of our 16 years of surveying the area.
So you were not on having a good time on the boat fishing expedition. This is a research expedition?
That's correct. We survey the shark populations here in Northeast Florida, Southeast Georgia. We've been doing this annually through support through NOAA Fisheries as well as UNF. And yes, this is work, but it's fun work.
And you say this is the first time in 16 years that this kind of fish has been found?
That's correct. The sawfish is an endangered species. It's been listed on the U.S. Endangered Species Act list as endangered since 2003. It was once at least relatively common. I don't know if I want to say common, but at least it did occur in Northeast Florida. But there really haven't been any records of anyone catching them recently within the past several decades. And so this is somewhat of a cause for celebration because it shows that the sawfish population is expanding out to areas that it once occupied.
So Cassidy, was this your first encounter up close with a sawfish? It really does sound a little bit like the stuff of nightmares, but was exciting.
Yes, ma'am. It was my first time ever seeing one, and I never thought I would ever get to see one and it was huge. It was very, very big, almost the size of the boat. And I don't want to say it was the thing out of nightmares, but I didn't expect it to look as weird as that. It was really, really amazing, though.
Describe it for people who haven't seen one.
So basically, I know that we were kind of debating when it was coming up. Some people thought it was a ray. Some people thought it was a shark. When it came up, it looked kind of like a little bit of both. The whole back end of it looked like a big shark, but then when it stuck the saw out of the water, it kind of looked like a ray, and when it flipped over, it looked like a ray. We were all kind of in shock for a little while because we did not think we were going to find that, especially not there. But we did, and it was really amazing, and it definitely was really strange looking.
Is this like the size of a chainsaw? I mean, it's not maybe that wide, but about that long? The bill itself.
Yes, ma'am. I would say it was about that long. Yeah, about that long.
And is that a dangerous thing to handle? What are you doing with it when you're bringing it aboard?
So what we did was we kind of tied the rear end, and we also tied the saw, that way it couldn't sling it up against us. But yes, ma'am, it was dangerous. It has like little barbs or teeth on it that are very, very sharp. You don't want to touch those because they can cut you. And it tried to kind of get one of us, but thankfully we were very careful, so we didn't get.
So no injuries.
No, ma'am.
And so how long does this take? I mean, you're to bring it in, to land the fish, and then to did you tag it? Was that what you did? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. We did tag it. Since there was a storm coming in, we were in a hurry. We were already a little bit behind. But it didn't take very long, only a couple of minutes. We got it up. We got it under control. It wasn't happy at first, so we kind of had to let it calm down a little bit. We tagged it, and I want to say it took maximum of 10 minutes because we had to get going, and we didn't want to keep it above the water for very long because, they're endangered. We don't want it to get hurt because it's out of the water for so long. But it wasn't for very long.
Yeah. And this find, have you gotten a big response since you notified the community? I imagine you notified NOAA because that's part of the program that you're working with.
Yes, we did get a big response. It's been pretty exciting because there's been a number of sawfish captures north of what we have generally considered their home range. Their home range is generally South Florida, Florida Keys, and the Caloosahatchee River, so off of Fort Myers. That's really been the center of where the remnant population has been occurring. Earlier this year, my colleagues collected sawfish in Tampa Bay. We've also had captures in Cedar Key. So this was unexpected, but I have to say it was something that we've been anticipating. And in fact, just several years ago, I had asked my colleagues to add us to their permit, which was exactly why we were able to actually handle the animal and tag it. Normally, if you're not on the endangered species permit, we would have had to have cut the line and released the animal without actually getting any measurements. But fortunately, we did have that authorization.
What do we know about why the sawfish is so endangered?
So the sawfish population within the U.S. used to be fairly plentiful, but again, they have that big saw. They use that saw for feeding. They slash it through the water in order to impale fish. So although they're a ray, they are fish eaters, and the saw itself is very easily trapped in line, and in fact, that's how we caught our animals. So it was very common in the early years for a sawfish to get captured in nets. When that would happen, they would be brought on shore. In many cases, the saw would be removed for trophy hunters. So it's not uncommon to go down to the Keys and see saws hanging up at above the counter on restaurants, things like that. So this is what really led to this population decline and the listing on the ESA. And fortunately, we're now seeing the population coming back, but again, it has some issues too that are occurring right now.
Yeah, and so in the news, we've been seeing stories about sawfish in the Keys area having what's called like a whirling disease or a spinning disease. Where describe what is happening, what
Ye-
people are seeing.
Yes. So earlier in the year, we first started to hear reports of fishermen and anglers, other folks on the water, reporting fish that were spinning or whirling, just swimming around in circles. In the case of the sawfish, of course, their saws above the water, so it's very prominent. This hasn't only affected sawfish; it's affected other fishes, but the sawfish seems to be particularly susceptible to it. There have been over 50 sawfish that have been recovered as carcasses by the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Uh, and this has slowed down a little bit, but it's still continuing. We're not really clear on what the actual cause is, and there's been a number of studies that have been conducted to look at whether or not this is, for example, pollutants. It doesn't seem to be pollutants. It might be something natural, like a natural toxin, but it does seem to be impacting the population. And of course, the population is already endangered, so it's really susceptible to anything that would cause these big impacts.
And the research has ruled out a number of things that I think we would naturally think of, a communicable pathogen, bacterial infections, low dissolved oxygen, which sometimes can impact species, salinity issues, temperature, even, which, we were seeing a lot of species impacted by warming waters in that area, particularly corals. But none of those things seem to be the reason for that disease.
No, they don't seem to be the reason, but they could be factors involved in this. And so, of course, this year or this past year, we saw this warming trend that led to the need for rescuing corals and bringing them into laboratories in order to replant them. There's maybe some suggestion that maybe that warm temperature may have activated something that may have been causing this.
Cassidy, we have a call from Charles on the west side. He wants to know what bait was used.
I want to say we were using mackerel. I want to say it was mackerel. We used pretty much whole mackerel on that one.
And was that in this fish's mouth, or you said it kind of got entangled in the line? So what was it that ultimately got the fish?
Yeah, so that's true. When we brought the line in, so this was a drum line. The drum line itself was wrapped around the
So you say
saw.
drum line, I think of something that people are like dancing to. What?
Sure. So the drum line is a single hook line. We normally fish with long lines, which contain 50 hooks on about 1,000 feet of line. In the case of the drum line, it's a single hook that's designed for keeping sharks in good condition. So it's just tethered to a single heavy weight and then a buoy. So when we come up, we grab the buoy, pull up the weight, and then if there's a shark on the line, of course, we'll be able to work it up. In this case, the very thick monofilament line was wrapped around the saw and was kind of hooked to itself. So the animal was actually not hooked in the mouth, which allowed us to secure it alongside the boat. Like Cassidy said, we don't actually pull the animal out of the water. The animal actually stays in the water itself as it's alongside the boat. But again, we're moving really quick so that there's no impact of being secured to the boat.
And Cassidy, this fish didn't have any signs of that spinning or whirling disease that you were able to see?
No, ma'am. Actually, when he swam off, he seemed perfectly fine. He didn't spin at all, and he just kind of swam straight ahead and then went down underwater.
And that is not the case for some other recent sightings. Is that right? I mean, that has been a problem even with fish that have come north into what was previously a depopulated area for those fish.
That's true. So, although my colleagues have caught and tagged sawfish in Tampa Bay, there are also reports that at least one or two of the sawfish were exhibiting the whirling disease within Tampa Bay, and they recovered the carcass afterwards.
So, how do you feel about this discovery? If this was a male fish, does that indicate anything about, whether there's a presence of other fish, female fish around?
Well, I think that's a definite conclusion, right? If there's one, there's probably more. I think it's a really good sign that the animals are starting to repopulate areas that we know they occur in. Again, this is an immature male, so it doesn't necessarily say anything about reproduction. We've been actually studying reproduction in the populations within the Florida Keys for quite some time. But it'll be really interesting to see whether or not we are fortunate enough to capture some more animals and possibly next time maybe get. So we used a conventional tag, but it would be very fortunate for us to put a tag in that might actually communicate with satellites, for example, or provide us with a little bit more specific information about the animal's movements.
Well, Cassidy, Terry, Jim, Gail Slider, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it. It's nice to hear about this good discovery and good news,
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Up next, we're going to be talking about a film festival that brings the LOLs to Jax.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, answering who, what, when, where, why, and how is critical to proving the truth. More at terrellhogan.com.
More than a century ago, a company called Calum helped Jacksonville become the winter film capital of the world, a reputation that lasted only a decade. Hear the fascinating true story on Bygone Jacks, Our Unsung History, a podcast from WJCT Public Media.
On the next Fresh Air, comic Nikki Glazer talks about sex so much on stage, she says she's come to think of her privates as her publics. We'll talk about why sex is a recurring subject in her act, her self-consciousness about her body and how she looks, and what it's like writing insults for celebrity roasts. Her recent roast of Tom Brady made headlines. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
There's a new global axis of autocracy. Strongmen who don't share ideology, they share a thirst for power.
The Chinese Communist Party and the Putin oligarchs aren't really for the same things, except to the extent that, as I said, they're against us, and I suppose they're all for their own power, and they're all very interested in money.
Ann Applebaum says the new twist is that autocrats now work together to keep that grip on power. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Rarely has there been an election campaign as dramatic as this year's race for the White House. 1A's election coverage remains focused not on the odds, but the stakes. Both campaigns have their talking points. We'll continue to pay more attention to yours. Join our weekly series, If You Can Keep It, next time.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. It's an annual festival that keeps the laughs local and the filmmaking funny. Here to tell us about the 7th annual LOL Jax Film Festival is the festival's creator, Monique Madrid. Welcome, Monique.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Also, the event's host, Jen Weeks. Hey, Jen.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, Jen, you are a Florida-based comedian.
Yes.
Actor, host of events, but your path to the comedy stage is a little bit, I think it's a little funny in the first place because you started cracking jokes essentially on a bus trip, a women's church trip.
Absolutely.
It's not a place I think most people think of as comedy gold, but explain how that
Definitely not.
started.
We were coming back from Savannah. It was the middle of the summer. The air was out, so all these women, estrogen was high. So me and another lady were talking about being single and dating and the type of men that were trying to date us. And the women were laughing, but we were just having conversation. And so a lady approached me and said she had a friend who was a comedian and was doing a show and wanted me to be on. And I was like, I'm definitely not a comedian. So long story short, I ended up doing the show and I checked it off. I was like, okay, that was a bucket list item, but it just kept coming. I kept getting more jokes. So probably I did my next show a year and a half after that. And I've been in love ever since.
Yeah.
So, yes.
What is it like to just adopt a new career field like that and go in a direction that you had no idea you were going to?
Absolutely scary because I was like, I have a full-time job. I am not looking like this is work and I don't want to work. But it's when I say I love it, I could work all day and be stressed out and tired. But when I get to go on that stage, it wipes everything out. Like I've gotten off work, drove to Orlando or further and did a show that night and drove back home because I absolutely love it.
How fun. And so what are you going to be doing at this LOL festival, the 7th?
I will be hosting the show. So I will open up the show and do some jokes and get the crowd together. And then I will also introduce our feature comedians that we have this year.
So, Monique, for people who haven't attended an earlier version of the LOL, what does it involve? It's a film festival, but it's all about comedy.
Yeah, so Love Our Locals is what the LOL stands for. So Jen's our host. We'll have comedians each night along with her. Bobby Parker, Mike Freed will be there. And then on Saturday night, we have David, which is a musician. So we usually have comedians, musicians, and films on Saturday. On Sunday, we'll have the films, comedians, and an award show.
And these are local films?
All local.
So
all local.
What are they about? Are they comic films themselves? Are they films about comics?
Yeah, no, they're comic films. Some people will do comedy as one genre and then have like a subgenre. Like this year we have some that they took horror on as a part of that subgenre. So it's anything. They could do a documentary about comedy if they wanted to. It's whatever they want. And what we love is the filmmakers come and they bring original material more and more each year. So they are literally like plotting what they're going to make for the LOL Film Festival, which is great for me. I'm super hyped that they believe in this.
Do you come to this from comedy or from filmmaking?
So my husband is a filmmaker. We both love comedy. Some of our favorite films together involve comedy of some sort. So comedy's just been something that's been good for our soul. And then we've seen a lot of things happen in the world, and sometimes comedy is what get us through. So it just felt right, and we always lead with positivity. So again, it just all came together. And then when Jen said yes, it just was like, okay, we know we have something here, because we wanted that comedy host to tie in, because it was supposed to be a film festival with the comedy, the comedians involved. And so her being a part of that just makes it full circle for us. Yeah.
So Jen, you do clean comedy, and I'm wondering if you think that that's harder or easier than comedy that's a little bluer in its nature.
For me, I think it's easier because that's how I started. So that was all I really knew.
Well, you were on a church trip, right? You're not going to go.
Right. So I started in church. My first couple of shows, and I still do shows that are at churches. So I think it's just easier, and it makes people think. because I can do a whole show and there's other comedians on there and they've done bluer stuff. But at the end, the comment is always, "Wait, you were clean the whole time." I'm like, "Yeah," but I like it, and you get to come up with new and interesting words instead of the word that blue word you want to put in there. You can put something else, so it can be the same content, but just lace it a little differently, and you can do it in front of different audiences.
Do you have a comic that inspires you, someone that you particularly love, or even a comedic film that you love a lot?
Right now, the comedian that inspires me the most would be Ali Sadiq.
Mhm.
He is an amazing, masterful storyteller, and I love the way he just pulls you in. And he's done shows about loss and grief, but it literally pulls you in. So I love you're gonna laugh, but you're taken on a ride. So I like for a comedian that does comedy, but brings you into their world.
We should say that you were voted best comedian in Jacksonville twice by Folio Weekly in 2018 and 2022.
Mhm.
So people appreciate it.
Yeah.
So Monique, how can people get involved?
Yeah, you can always submit every year, April 1st. If you want to be a comedian on our stage, or if you want to be a filmmaker that presents a film.
Submissions are closed for this year.
They are closed for this year, but that's just every year, and they close on June 30th. And then, of course, the audience, if you just want to come and love local film, comedy, and music, just come on out, go to loljacks.com, and you can buy some tickets August 3rd and 4th at WJCT Studios
Right here at WJCT Studios. All right. Well,
Yeah.
Jen Weeks, Monique Madrid, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
That is our program. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can subscribe to our podcast and never miss another episode. Tomorrow, we're going to be sitting down with veteran journalist Jim Piggott and news anchor John Bachman, both just retired. We're going to be talking about how media has changed over the years. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.